Hello and welcome to part two of our transfer deadline day live here at a local TV. Of course, at 12 o'clock, we went live on our West Midlands and North West channels online to talk about Liverpool, Everton, Manchester City, Manchester United, and all four of the West Midlands clubs. Now we're going to talk about our Newcastle United and Leeds windows. Got myself representing Newcastle at the moment. We're not sure whether Jordan Cronin will be joining us a bit later on, but for now, also, we've got Lee Sobert of the Yorkshire Evening Post to discuss Leeds, and that is where we're going to start. So, Lee, I mean, we've chatted on numerous occasions this summer about Leeds' summer window, and it's been an interesting one to say the least. Before we get into the ins and outs that might happen today, if any at all, we'll look at Leeds' window as a whole, and of course, the main points earlier on in the window were the sales of Archie Gray to Tottenham and then Crescencio Somerville to West Ham. Lots of money brought in for the two of them, but they were big losses, weren't they?
Yeah, and then obviously followed by Giorgio Ruter on top of that as well. I mean, that three massive, players gone basically. So to a certain degree, whatever they do and whoever they bring in, it's basically that's always going to be sort of like the headline factor, isn't it? Of those three players going, and you can't really replace three players as good as that. I mean, you'd like to be able to, obviously, but you just can't. But I think the thing is now is as we count down towards the end of the window, whether they can get a replacement in for Giorgio Ruter in terms of, somebody else who can play number 10, I think would really make the difference to how this window is viewed. And if they don't, which looks like it might be the case, looks like it might be it now in terms of Al Tanaka coming in, obviously the Japan international midfielder, that's been announced already. Isaac Schmidt we're expecting to be done at some stage before the 11 p.m. deadline. They're the two. He's a full-back, left-back, but he can play lots of places, but essentially a defensive player. They're the two we're expecting. And, I think they'll both be two, solid signings at probably pretty decent prices, 3.3 million-ish for Tanaka, around about 3 million euros for Schmidt. So you're not sort of busting the bank to get those two. But I think fans just want to see one big name coming in really, to sort of like not replace Ruter, but at least sort of like go some way towards replacing him. And I think that'll be the worry, that basically he'll get to the end of this window and it'll be a bit like, is there enough up front and from an attacking sphere? That said, fresh deals this week. Manor Solomon obviously coming in from Tottenham. If he stays fit, because obviously he was out for most of last season with an injury, I think he'd be a very, very good signing who should really thrive in the Championship and should get a lot of goals and assists. And Largi Ramazani is the other player, obviously, who's come in and kind of seen as the replacement for Somerville. Daniel Farker very keen at his press conference to say that he doesn't want to see, like players seen as a replacement like for like, because basically it puts a lot of pressure on players, doesn't it? If you're staying in and he's saying, right, young lad like that, Largi Ramazani coming in, you're going to be the replacement for the Championship's Player of the Year. It puts a lot of pressure on you. But essentially that's, it's kind of like he's in for Somerville. I suppose you could say Solomon's in for Ruter, but I mean, you just got, Ruter record signing as well and stuff. So big boots to fill, really. The other aspects I would probably try and remember with this window as well is that they're not signings as such, but also you've got to think of the players that have come back who were on loan last season. So that's probably the one thing that might get a little bit forgotten about. And Brendan Aronson obviously has come back. He's been reintegrated into the group and he's already got 2 goals this season. And that feels like a signing from within sort of thing. So that's a bit of a mitigating factor, I think, you could probably look at. But I mean, I think the signings, obviously, they picked up a pace with these signings in the last few days, in the last week and a half of the window, and it's finished. The window's finishing in strong fashion for Leeds, but it had to do because they hadn't got enough signings in, and the squad was too small. So it is finishing in a strongish sense. But I still don't think, unless they get like another attacking player in a number 10 in, I don't think it'll be viewed by fans as like a brilliant window, because obviously the main thing is they'll look at the 3 big players that have gone. So that's the reality of it. The other reality of it, though, Daniel, is that if you lose a playoff final and you don't get promoted, and you've got players who are blatantly good enough to play in the Premier League in those 3, then you're probably going to lose them. And that's just the reality of football, because you're stuck in the second tier and there's, financial fair play and stuff to think about as well. So that's the reality. But I just think fans would probably like them to have just done a little bit more. And I think one more signing, i.e. an attacking player, a number 10 or something, would make a huge difference. Whether we get it or not remains to be seen. I think it's looking doubtful, I think.
Well, yes, there's about, 10 or so hours, just under that, 9 hours maybe to go now of the window. And I mean, when you look at who they've sold, Leeds, they have gone out and, they've brought replacements in. Of course, some of those gone out. Then you've got Ramazani coming in. Yeah. I think Solomon's, we mentioned on the previous podcast we did. I think Solomon's a shrewd bit of business if he stays fit, given his experience in this country as well, and the talent that he certainly possesses. But I think you're right in saying about the attacking sense, though, because of course you've sold Jorginho Ruter, you've got Joel Pirot, and then you've got Bamford, you've got Matteo Joseph.
Yeah.
Do you think that's good enough for Leeds, or do you think again they are missing something that's there, and they might just get through just on the lack of quality from other teams around the division?
Yeah, quite possibly, and that might be what it comes down to here. They might almost get away with it as such because of the Championship this season, because there is no Leicester, because there is no Southampton, well, no Ipswich first and foremost, and because there's no Southampton. And we saw like the hot pace that was record-breaking pace that was set last season. You never know; it might happen again. Yeah, you don't know, do you? I mean, it looked that way when Burnley won 2 out of 2, but obviously that 100% record soon went. I mean, as we're sat in now, Sunderland are on 3 out of 3, but and Watford. But I think, generally speaking, most people would be surprised if the standard was as high this season as it was last season. So, but then again, you look at it now, and I think you'd have to say Leeds' squad, or certainly team, is. You got to say it's weaker than the one that finished last season, because you've lost Archie Gray, Crysencio Summerville, and Jorginho Ruter. So it'd be almost impossible to say it's better. You might be able to say the squad's maybe more equipped now to go up in terms of obviously have they got more options, spread around the place and stuff. But it's difficult to say because a lot of these players that are coming in, you just don't know what they're going to be like. I mean, Tanaka's got Japan international midfielder with 27 caps and 8 goals to his name. So I mean, that's pretty decent, really, and obviously a lot of experience of Bundesliga too. So we'll wait and see how he gets on. Schmidt, I think, will be a player who can fit in lots of different positions. And obviously, even the other two, like Solomon, we've not seen him yet. We've not seen Ramazani yet. I think Ramazani would be an exciting signing, and whether he'll quite be as good as Summerville remains to be seen, but I think he'll be decent. But the other thing you've got to remember is Mana Solomon's only on loan. Ruter's obviously gone, for a big fee. So that's another thing that fans will think, well, why can't the money be reinvested? But as Daniel Farker said many times before, you've got to pay for sins of the past, etc., is the way he phrases it. PSR rules to contend with and whatnot. But yeah, I think you're right. Assuming the window finishes like this with Tanaka's done. Schmidt, we're expecting to be done at some stage before 11 p.m. They're both attacking midfielder-ish in Tanaka, but Schmidt's basically a fullback, like I say. Then the one area you would look at with this squad is goals and probably striker stroke number 10. I think that's the thing, because obviously, the two that brought in this week, Ramazani is basically a winger. Yes, he can probably play at number 10 as well. Solomon was asked as well himself, in his LUTV interview straight away, what's your best position? Left wing, he said, can also play right wing or number 10. So I think both of them can play at number 10, and the same with Aronson. But maybe someone who could be a number 10 who can also play up front, maybe that's what they're going to be missing, and it's like you're totally right. You're looking at the front three. There's no Ruter now, is there? Obviously, he could play up front as well. And it's basically going to be down to, really, you would think, Matteo Joseph, who's still a very young striker, Patrick Bamford, if and when he's fit, and then Joel Pirou, So, I mean, who obviously can score goals, but has equally been hit and miss. So, yes, there are other players who can probably step up. Like, you could probably play some of them new signings up front. I mean, you could probably play Aronson up there, but they're not natural strikers. So, striker stroke number 10 is the one worry you might have. But it might be a case that, they sort of still have enough quality anyway to get by. If Joseph hits the ground, I mean, he's obviously, the season's already started. If Joseph gets on a run and becomes the striker that everyone sort of hopes he will be and can be, obviously, he was favourite to win the Golden Boot at the start of the season, which is incredible for someone, A, so young, and B, someone who hadn't even started a league game. It's pretty ridiculous. But it's because people and the bookies aren't stupid, and they'll look at it and think, this guy's probably going to be first choice striker for the rest of the season, apart from maybe if and when Bamford's fit. But I mean, how often is that going to be? And Leeds are favourites for the league. So that's why he was favourite to win to be top scorer. But he hasn't scored yet. But if he gets going and gets on a run, then hopefully they'll be all right. But that is the one thing you'd sort of maybe, just have your sort of reservations about, will there be enough goals coming, centrally, basically, i.e. number 10, number 9. But the strong favourites, even now I look at it, and like literally every day they seem to get shorter and shorter. They're now 2-1 favourites for the division leads, which is pretty short realistically, at this stage of the season. So it might well come down to like how strong the championship is. That might be the most important point.
Yeah, I feel like you certainly haven't got the teams such as Leicester last season, of course. For example, they were they were very good. And then even Ipswich, to be fair as well, they had spent a lot of money because they'd done back-to-back promotions. So you were fighting against some really strong, rich sides there as well. This season, of course, you've got Burnley, but I think you've got others in there as well. Perhaps I think maybe the standard in terms of the top teams is not there, but I think there perhaps might be a bit more of a little battle around the playoff region. Perhaps, I mean, of course, in the Northeast region, which I cover as well, you've got the likes of Sunderland who have started the season fantastically well. And I think they've actually had a decent enough transfer window. I know Jack Clark's gone to Ipswich for perhaps a smaller fee than they would have wanted, at around 20 million or so, especially given, what's been touted before, at least. But they have brought in some quality players. You look at Alan Brown, you look at Juan Poveda, of course, Lee, you know about him being ex-Leeds as well. And then they've got Chris Mepham on the way for a loan deal from Bournemouth, a defender today. So that's, a shrewd bit of business as well. And they've got, I think, Wilson Isidore, I think is how it's pronounced as well, who is dubbed as a striker. And a striker is something they've needed for a while, although Mayenda has started the season well. You've got the likes of Luton, who maybe haven't had the start they would have wanted, but given that they have that Premier League experience, will be a decent enough side. You've got Middlesbrough, who are a bit hit and miss at times, of course. When they came to Ellen Road in the League Cup, they ran riot in that 10 minutes, but have looked a bit suspect in other games so far. So I think it's going to be an interesting, that little region where, is it playoffs, is it automatic, or do they miss out completely? There's a lot of teams in there who could be quite decent. I mean, Sheffield United, another one as well.
Yeah, they're another one, definitely, yeah.
But looking at today, it is deadline day. Before we go too far off topic, you've mentioned Schmidt and Tananka. So are they all we're expecting today at Elland Road?
I think it's the way Daniel Farke put it in his pre-match press conference ahead of this weekend's game on Saturday afternoon against Hull City was we'll stay awake. We'll be awake right until the end of the window in terms of looking for like a number 10.
Just yet, is what they
literally, don't go to bed just yet. I don't think that's so. Daniel Farke won't be. And let's hope Leeds don't either, because like I say, I think they could do with, like a sort of another number 10, basically. A number 10 who can also play up front, but a number 10, essentially, that's the thing. And, I think they'll be looking to do something, but whether they can get something done or not remains to be seen, because obviously, transfers can happen very, very late on deadline day, as we know, and you get deal sheet stages and all the rest of it and everything like that. So things can happen quickly, but normally when some things, come in, you kind of know it's coming and stuff. And look, they've looked at Gustavo Hamer at Sheffield United. Obviously, a bid went in for him, but that got knocked back. I think they were miles apart on valuation on that. There was talk of the potential swap deal with Peru, but that's we're led to believe that's not been the case. So probably write that one off. Roland Salai, the other one, obviously at Freiburg. Again, someone else would be a very, very good signing, and obviously there is interest there. But whether they can get something done for that, if something happens now, I think it's going to be very, very late. And I think obviously fans would welcome that if it happened, and you couldn't rule it out. But if you're being realistic and you're sort of like thinking now and predicting what's going to happen, I think you're talking those two signings in, and that's it. Tanaka's obviously already done. Schmidt, probably be. He's flying over actually, today on the day, because he played last night in Turkey, in Europe. So, obviously because of that, you can imagine that being reasonably late, i.e. probably in the evening for him to get done. Obviously, you can never rule out outs. Nonto has been one of the stories of the summer about interest in him. So I don't think people would be falling off the seats if something happened with that, in terms of fans. But hopefully, Leeds don't want to sell him and don't need to sell now. So, and he's a big player, so hopefully they'll keep him. Joe Gelhardt he's a sort of player who could potentially go out on loan, but I think that would probably only be if they get another attacking player in. And obviously Liam Cooper, we were talking earlier in the week about him going to Hull. It seems like that's fallen through, but he might well be off to Derby. But one way or the other, you'd expect him to probably seal a move somewhere or other before the end of the deadline. Whether there's any youngsters that go out on loan or something, potentially is usually a couple in the evening, although doesn't seem anything imminent on that front. So, yeah, that's kind of where we're at, really. Basically, one's in Tanaka, and a second one is expected in Schmidt. I think you can almost say that's basically certain to happen. And then it's just whether they get a third in. And, I suppose with that just depends on, how much they're willing to pay, who's available, what they can sort out in the final few hours of the window. I certainly think they'll be trying, but whether they can get something done at this stage remains to be seen. And I think if they don't, then obviously it'll be disappointing. But my gut feeling is they might just get away with it because of the division, and because not just because of the division. Let's be fair, because of Leeds' squad. Even if they don't get a third signing in, in a number 10, if you look through that squad and the players they've got, that squad should be getting top 2. I mean, it should be. It's simple as that. And I think you're totally right to talk about the dangers in the division. Sunderland are a team who I could definitely see emerging as big threats. I still think it'll be between Leeds and Burnley at this stage, but it could well change. But realistically, with the squad Leeds have got, even if they don't get another attacker in, they should have enough there to get top 2. But I mean, it's all ifs, shoulds, and maybes, isn't it? It's got to go out and do it. Got to go out and get it done. I think if they got another number 10 in or another attacker in before the end of the window, I think you'd be very, very confident. No, you can be very confident, but you'd be a lot more confident of them going up, obviously. And if they don't, you'd just be a bit like, is there enough there? And also, just could have done with one more. But we'll wait and see. As you say, don't go to bed just yet. You never know. We might get 10:30 and they've announced a sparkling new number 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I can't see it, but we live in hope. And this is transfer deadline day, so you never know.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think we do often hype transfer deadline day up a little bit more than it's worth. But something I asked to the other lads on the previous show was looking at the spending that's happened in this window compared to last summer. Even it's not astronomically lower in both the Premier League and the Championship, but it is a margin lower than it has been. And of course, you look at the PSR rules and you look at who Leeds have had to sell this summer, given the fact that they didn't go up, and also to keep in line with those guidelines. Do you think, is it a positive impact it's having? Is it a negative impact it's having on the spending? I mean, obviously, Leeds have suffered the consequences of having to sell some big names for big money.
Well, the bottom line is you've got to obey by the PSR rules. It's as simple as that. The last thing anybody wants is a points deduction hanging over your head or something like that. And I'm sure we'll see that this season, obviously, with other teams, but it won't be Leeds, because obviously that's one thing they've made sure they're very, very in line with. And basically, it comes down to two things, really. I think it comes down to obviously the PSR guidelines that you've got to adhere to, and also it comes down to what division you're in and where your football club is at, and that's the bottom line with it, realistically. And like I said, if you don't get promoted and you miss out on promotion, and you've got a team or a squad, chock full of players that are good enough to play at the top level, then the reality is they're probably going to move on, and obviously then what price, it then comes down to what money other clubs have got for them, etc., etc. But I think certainly from a Leeds point of view, I think the prices they probably got for the players that have gone is probably not too bad. I mean, I know obviously Archie Gray's potential is absolutely enormous. There's no doubt about that. But the fact of the matter is he has only had one season in the Championship, so to be getting what they got for him is probably not too bad. Although obviously you might look in 5 years' time and think, bloody hell, could have look what he's worth now. Ruter again, obviously a fantastic player in Somerville, but they have got decent fees in for them. Somerville's the one, I think, for Championship Player of the Year. They probably could have done with getting a bit more for him. But yeah, I mean, it's just the way it is, isn't it? And stuff. Obviously, there's rules to adhere to and stuff. It's certainly not stopping Chelsea at the moment, is it? In teams like that, I suppose, in terms of the spending, and we'll see what happens there on deadline day. But yeah, I mean, at least one thing Leeds won't have to worry about is anything on the PSR from. That's been quite clear for some time. And like I say, they should still have a good enough squad to be able to do it. But yeah, that's the way it's kind of going now, I suppose. We've obviously teams spending slightly less. I mean, obviously back in the days you had just everyone going out and just going mad, didn't you? But I mean, you can still have big deals, obviously, that can come in and stuff. Obviously, the Saudi teams and stuff like that. So there's loads of different facets to it. But yeah, you're right. The first thing you've got to do now is obviously it's not just a case of going out and buying who you want. You've got to adhere to them PSR rules. Definitely. I mean, that's just part of the game now, and I think it's here to stay. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just in my head. I'm just replaying that famous interview with Leeds back in the early 2000s. But we live the dream sort of thing, and you don't really see that from clubs like Leeds or any other clubs of that sort of size anymore. It's only like those who have those massive revenues, who are able to spend relatively freely. I mean, Chelsea's just it's mad what they have done, and it would appear they're still not quite done in this window yet. Yeah, which I find unbelievable. Now I've just had a message from Jordan. He will be joining us in probably about sort of 5 to 10 minutes. So Lee, if you do need to hop off at any point, that's absolutely fine. I mean, before I do let you go though, I asked the other lads to sort of rate Leeds' their own club's window in terms of do out of 10 and go through it all and summarize a little bit. So if you had to rate Leeds' window out of 10 in terms of both incomings and outgoings, and I think it's the season, how would you put it?
Well, I think even if they got another forward in, or a number 10 in before the end of the window, I think it'd be very, very hard to give it anywhere like an 8 or a 9 out of 10, purely because you've lost Archie Gray, Somerville, and Ruter. So if you're losing those 3 players and players of those magnitude, then straight away you're sort of like battling, obviously, to give it a high rate. And that said, they have finished it fairly strongly. They have got some players in. I think at the moment you're probably talking about a 6 or a 7, something like that. I mean, But it depends on what sort of how you're doing the scores, you know, because if you're doing the scores just on like black and white in terms of you look at the list of players that have gone, the list of the players that have come in, then you could probably score it lower. But the reality is that if you're a championship club that have missed out on promotion, you know, you can't just suddenly say, well, I'll tell you what, we're just going to keep all of our best players. It's as simple as that. You can't, because A, those players want to go and play in the Premier League, B, because teams are after them, and C, because you've got PSR to contend with. So they're all three things you've got to look at. So, you know, you've got to make allowances for that to a degree. Or I think the bottom line is, I think that everybody would agree with, is that whatever you give Leeds' window out of 10 at the moment, as we sit here at 1:30 p.m. on transfer deadline day, it could probably go up a couple of scores if they get another number 10 in before the end of the window, you know, and i.e. it could go from a 6 out of 10 to an 8 out of 10, or a 5 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10. But as it stands at the moment, because there's those things to contend with as well, I think somewhere between a 5 and a 7, something like that. You know, I wouldn't go wild about it. But obviously, you know, if they finish strongly, then obviously you could bank it up higher. So let's say a 6 for now and stuff. And look, if those signings that come in end up absolutely flying, then obviously you might look back on it and think, you know, actually it's a lot better than it seemed at the time. Tanaka in particular, you know, for a reasonably small fee at 3.3 million, bearing in mind he's an attacking midfielder who can score goals and get assists as well, he might end up proving a very, very shrewd acquisition. But at the moment, I think around about a 6, which is probably about right. I think, you know, I mean, there will be a lot of people who will say, you know, that even that's too high. Like, how can you give it that when basically you've got rid of the best players and you've not really replaced them and stuff? But as I say, the reality is you are going to lose your best players if you lose a playoff final. You're not going to suddenly line up for the next season if you lose a playoff final stronger than you were at the start, you know, last season. It just doesn't work like that, basically. So you've got to factor in that. I don't think anybody would be giving it particularly much higher marks than that, but they might do if they got somebody else in, as I say, in a number 10. So somewhere around about the 5-6 at the market at the moment, but probably might still have enough to get the job done, I suspect.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair to Leeds, I think they've done well to keep a hold of Wilfred Gnonto as well, because just like Rutter, just like Somerville, you know, he was touted with a move away. And I know they have lost 2 of those 3 that I've just mentioned, plus Archie Gray as well. At least they haven't lost them all as well. I think that.
Well, you're totally right, and the point is now if you're saying like, well, at the moment you're probably thinking about a 5 or a 6 out of 10 for the window as a whole. I mean, it's not done yet. If they were to lose Gnonto at 10 o'clock or something, then obviously it goes down a couple of marks more, doesn't it? So I mean, anybody who's given it a ridiculously low mark has to remember that. And you're quite right. There's always, you know, it's always easy to look at the obvious things, isn't it? You know, like, well, why didn't we spend more money? Why couldn't we go and do this? Why didn't we replace Rutter? And some of the like for like and stuff? But it's not as easy as that. And you are right. You've got to look at the whole, you know, the whole spectrum of it, the big picture and stuff. And like, you know, there are people like Gnonto that are still here, not just him, others as well and stuff. So, you know, there's a lot to factor in. But yeah, I don't think you could say, you couldn't go wild about the window at the moment. But I mean, you know, at least I think a few weeks ago, people would probably be giving it a 2 or a 3 out of 10 because hardly anybody was coming in, you know, but it's obviously got a lot better since then. And I think they have got good players in with Ramazani and Solomon, and Tanaka and Schmidt is about to come in. So it's bit by bit, the score's creeping up. You know, you're going up from 4 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. There's just a feeling, I think, that you could start going a lot higher. And whether they get, you know, as I say, by getting somebody else in a number 10 or an attacker. But if that doesn't happen, then, you know, it's probably about middle of the road, really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree completely there, Lee. Now, as I say, if you need to hop off, I think Jordan should be joining us soon enough.
Well, we shall see what happens, Daniel. But good to see you as always, and we shall see what happens with the remaining hours of the window.
Not you know, honestly, the other day it was all the Oasis puns, and now today it's all just all the Leeds Twitter puns as well.
Exactly. Right then, well, that'll do it for now, but we'll catch up with you soon.
Yes, thank you very much, Lee. I'm going to hold the stream until Jordan joins us, and then we'll be talking Newcastle United. But thank you, Lee. So that was the Leeds United chat there. Of course, the Championship shaping up nicely to head into the majority of the season. As we mentioned, not just Leeds doing business, you know, the likes of Sunderland have done business. Middlesbrough, of course, as well. They've brought in Tommy Conway. I think that's probably their biggest deal. They've also brought in Aidan Morris, who is someone I did a recent interview with as well at the open training session. Now, that is available online, but also be going on my Twitter, where many of you might be watching very soon, perhaps in the next day or two as well. But yeah, I think as deadline days go, it's probably not going to be too busy. From recent reports, I mean, we'll get into Newcastle properly when Jordan does join, but a report suggests that Newcastle are working on perhaps one incoming on this deadline day. Of course, the Mark Gay deal appears to be a non-starter at this stage. Palace pushing the price up too much. James Trafford, of course, has been mentioned as another goalkeeper, even though they've already brought in 2 this summer in John Ruddy and Blakademos from Nottingham Forest, a deal which, let's be honest, was massively inflated and done just because of PSR with Elliot Anderson going the other way for a good fee, given how much Newcastle actually, had from Elliot Anderson from his playing days at Newcastle, despite the talent that he possesses. But overall for Newcastle, it's been a disappointing window. I don't think anyone else can have anything more to say than that. It's not been good. You've brought in Lloyd Kelly, you've brought in, as I say, 2 goalkeepers there, and you've brought in William Osula for £15 million from Sheffield United as a young backup striker to Callum Wilson when he returns into, of course, to Alexander Isak. But apart from that, to bring in no signings that go straight into the first 11, even Lloyd Kelly, let's be honest, is just a squad player looking to add the depth in an area that they had some issues last season. It's not great, is it, to be honest? Other clubs around them, of course, have strengthened. You look at Aston Villa. Yes, they've had to get rid of some. Douglas Luiz going out, Amadou Onana going out. They're 2 big losses for Aston Villa as they head into the Champions League. Of course, they've already lost Matty Cash to injury as well. So perhaps their depth is not quite there, just like Newcastle's was last season. But they brought in Ian Matson, who they're yet to see. They've brought in Ross Barkley, if I recall rightly, as well. And so, they've made acquisitions. West Ham have certainly had a good window. Crescencio Somerville, as we just mentioned with Lee, Fulkrug as well, despite his age, is a good bit of business, in my opinion. And so, and then you look at Brighton, of course, as well, who've brought in so many new players. They brought in Ruter from Leeds, as we've mentioned already as well. Yes, they, of course, their signing from Celtic went off in their League Cup game. I think, what was it, 8 minutes into that game, which is a bit of a disappointment. But Brighton have brought in a lot, and you think, well, Newcastle are standing still in comparison to some of their rivals. Even Man United have brought in, Chelsea, of course, have brought in an absolute load. So these are the teams around Newcastle who are improving, or at least trying to strengthen. Then you could argue if they've lost some and they've gained some. But Newcastle are they weaker than they were in May as well? I mean, given the fact that I know Jan Cooper-Minter never played a minute for Newcastle, and now he's at Brighton as well. And Elliot Anderson was out injured a lot last season, but did look sharp enough when he came back. So are they weaker than they were this time at the end of last season? You could argue so. I think, having observed the press conference this morning with Eddie Howe, he perhaps was a frustrated figure that Newcastle haven't been able to bring in who they wanted. Now, of course, Mark Gay was the number 1 target, and Eddie Howe actually did confirm that they had looked at other targets in the window and they weren't able to bring any of them in. Now, to me, that is a failure of their recruitment this summer, because yes, Mark Gay would have been, let's be honest, a great signing given how he performed at the Euros, and yes, they would have probably overpaid for him by a solid 10 to 15 million pounds, perhaps even more than that. But he would have bolstered that back line, and when you get Botman back, when you get Shea back in the next couple of games, and of course Botman in a little bit longer, of course, perhaps weeks to months for Sven Botman, you're looking at a really good back line. You'd think, well, Sven Botman and Fabian Shea would be your obvious starting choice, and then you've got Mark Gay as well, who's him alongside Botman. That's probably your next defensive partnership for the next 5 to 10 years at least. And to not get that, that's really quite poor. And then to not get another target that they could have done if Gay wasn't going to happen, I think Newcastle probably should have walked away from that deal a little bit earlier. And to be honest, though, having said that, I thought it still would have gotten done. Even when a lot of the bids were rejected, I thought they'd still come back in and, perhaps push a little bit more. Either that or Palace would have accepted, given, let's be honest, the money Newcastle were offering for him. They were overpaying if they had paid the fees that were reported. But yeah, it's been a poor window for Newcastle. On the contrast, I think it's been a good window for Sunderland. You look at, yes, they've had Jack Clark go out, but they've brought in Juan Poveda. Now, yes, his perhaps goal and assist record isn't brilliant given his time in the Championship so far at Leeds or at Sheffield Wednesday, but he certainly got the talent, and if Regis Labrise can coax some of that out of him, as he has done with Romain Mundle in the first couple of games so far, then there's a bright future there. Of course, you've got Alan Brown, who's a good bit of business, certainly brings the average age of Sunderland's starting 11 up a little bit, given what they would normally have. But given his experience at Preston and how good he was at Preston last season, I think that's a great piece of business as well, alongside the likes of Chris Rigg. And Chris Rigg will learn from Brown. And of course, then also they provide that competition in there as well. Now, I think Sunderland are still sort of crying out for an out-and-out number 9. I know you've brought in Wilson Isidore, who could be described as a striker. I think a lot of people probably will describe him as a striker. And we'll see how he fits in when he first makes a first-team appearance. And then you've got... Who else have Sunderland got that they've brought in? Of course, Chris Mepham. That's it. He used to come in on loan, and I think that's good as well. I think Sunderland have had a good window, to be honest. They've strengthened in areas they needed to strengthen, and not only that, though, I think the best piece of business they've done is bring in Regis Lebris. Now, I know none of us really knew a lot about him when he came into the Stadium of Light a month or two ago now, but Sunderland just seemed to be an awful lot better both on and off the ball compared to how they certainly finished last season. It was diabolical, if we're being brutally honest. They weren't very good at all, Sunderland. They were just passive. They let teams come onto them, and then even when they went forward, they just looked sort of devoid of ideas. And all of a sudden, you've got a team who presses high and wins the ball back in high areas and dangerous areas on the pitch. And then when they lose the ball, they slip seamlessly into a rigid defensive unit. You know, I know they conceded in the League Cup against Preston, but when it's come to the Championship, they haven't yet conceded a goal. Now, yes, that might change things a little bit when that finally happens, or when that inevitably happens. But for now, that they seem to be such a well-oiled outfit. When you've got Middlesbrough, now Middlesbrough's an interesting one because I think last season started pretty poorly for Middlesbrough, given the results that they had. Emmanuel Latilaf didn't really perhaps hit the ground running until later on in the season, when, of course, he started to score a lot of goals. This season, they started really well. They got that 1-0 win on the first day against Swansea. Since then, they then went to Leeds in the League Cup, as we mentioned, won 3-0, looked really good. Excuse me. And then they've been a bit hit and miss. Now, I know the Derby game against a team that you'd probably expect Middlesbrough to be beating, even though it was away from home. Derby, you know, they got that goal, which was, let's be honest, it was a Middlesbrough's own making, a really bad back pass towards the keeper. And then they go and score. Middlesbrough, let's be honest, though, they peppered the Derby goal that game and just couldn't put the ball in the net. And there's the Portsmouth game. There was another defensive error in that game as well. And Portsmouth are leading for large parts of that game. And Middlesbrough just about rescue a point right at the end with a penalty. Tommy Conway scoring, of course, on his home debut. And that's a good piece of business as well, because, of course, he is a shrewd Championship attacker. He knows where the goal is in this division, having done well at Bristol City. But have Middlesbrough done perhaps enough in the transfer market? I don't know. I think we'll see. I mean, obviously they've brought in Aidan Morris as well, who looks like a good young prospect from the Columbus Crew as well. So we'll see how he goes. But you've got him, you've got Tommy Conway, and perhaps one or two others as well. So it remains to be seen just how they'll do. But I think under Michael Carrick, they've got a good manager, someone who certainly is tactically very astute. But are they missing that little bit of flair, perhaps, in the middle of the park to, create the opportunities going forward? Perhaps. I think that's what they're missing. You could argue some are missing that as well, to an extent. But overall, you'd imagine Middlesbrough, like Sunderland, would challenge for the playoffs this season. It just depends on how this main part until January goes now, whether they've done enough business. Now, at the moment, obviously, we're still waiting on Jordan, so I'll just keep talking for now until we know for definite whether Jordan is or isn't joining us. But yeah, I mean, obviously, to all of those watching on my Twitter page, I do thank you for staying tuned. It is transfer deadline day at the moment, of course. Nothing really to talk about with the three Northeast clubs and Leeds in terms of a lot of incomings. I mean, the latest is that Newcastle are working on one incoming. I'd imagine that would be James Trafford from Burnley, but we don't know for certain yet. Certainly, I'll be up at the training ground a bit later on to report live from there to see whether any incomings do arrive up at Little Benton. Sunderland, Chris Mepham, he's to come in. He's currently having a medical at the Academy of Light, as far as we know, a season-long loan from Bournemouth, and that's a good bit of business for them, I think, for Sunderland, as we've already mentioned. Middlesbrough, nothing really there as well. Of course, Leeds, you've got Tananka, and you've got Schmidt, supposedly on the way in. Of course, for Leeds, as we mentioned, Leeds don't go to bed just yet as well. But all in all, it's shaping up to be a relatively quiet transfer deadline day in the Northeast and Yorkshire. I think Leeds will do the most business. Sunderland, as I say, one in. Middlesbrough, not really looking like anything. And Newcastle, it remains to be seen whether they get one in across the line. As I say, I will just be checking for any updates as we go. But at the moment, I can't seem to see anything else that's worthy of talking. And now we've just had a confirmation from the Daily Mirror here. Oliver Glasner confirms that Mark Gee will be staying at Crystal Palace. So that's that deal. That's that deal off. Mark Gee will not be coming to Newcastle. Now, on that one, I think it's an interesting one. From Palace's point of view, I think is the main point of view, because of course he's only got 2 years of his contract left. They were going to get a lot of money for him. Should they have accepted? I know obviously Steve Parish has gone out into the media, and he's, let's be honest, played this whole saga into the media. It's worked for him in the sense that they've kept a hold of Mark Gee, and Newcastle haven't been able to agree that deal that they wanted, that Eddie Howe would have wanted. But when it comes to next summer, at least, if he does go then, when he's got 1 year left on his deal, be at a reduced price. If he goes the next summer after that, he'll go for, let's be honest, on a free, unless of course he signs a new contract. But yeah, it's an interesting one. Will Palace come to rue not signing him in the end? I'm not sure. They certainly won't make as much money on him as they were going to if they had sold him to Newcastle. But the flip side to that is that they get to keep their captain and their best centre half for at least another season. So it's you look at exactly who's the real winners in this. I think, let's be honest, both sides have come out of this not looking great in terms of a media PR perspective. Newcastle, in the sense that they've held on for so long trying to get this deal done, not got it done in the end. And they've been, let's be honest, slung along a little bit by Palace. Palace, of course, probably won't get as much money from him ever again. So it's a bit of a downer on that side. But they're keeping their captain and one of their best players. So depends how you look at it, I guess. Fabrizio Romano now reporting that Sunderland have sent a bid to Ghent for a striker, Ahmed Abdullahi. Talks ongoing. James Copley of the Sunderland Echo understands that Luis Hemia to Juventus, that could be accurate, and the deal could happen today on transfer deadline day. Of course, others now reporting at the South London Press about the Mark Gee deal being completely off, not going to Newcastle. Obviously, Mark Gee, as we already mentioned, was a target for Newcastle throughout this window, but Oliver Glasner confirming in his press conference this afternoon that he won't be going anywhere. The quote is that, "Yes, I can confirm, but I was never in doubt. Congratulations to our owners because they didn't give in, and all the rumours didn't influence his performances." So it's an interesting one, as I say, and we'll perhaps speculate on that a little bit more if Jordan does join. But he also thanks Mark as well, being consistently open with Glasner. So clearly, as a true professional, Mark Gee hasn't been too affected by these rumours. But to be honest, I think from Newcastle's point of view, they've missed out on what would have been a really good signing there. Although I do think they should have walked away early when it was becoming evident the deal wasn't really going to be done. It's a hard one to know, isn't it? Just going through Twitter now as well. Glasner also saying that Mark had always told me that he's not pushing to leave, and that was important for him as well. Newcastle had actually apparently in the end, according to Keith Downey, offered 70 million for Mark Gay. That was 65 up front with 5 million worth of add-ons as well. That would have been a club record deal for Newcastle had it happened. Would have cost more than Alexander Isak had cost as well. Now, of course, we had Charlie on before. Fulham have rejected a bid in the region of 10 million for striker Jay Stansfield to Birmingham City. There's actually things starting to pick up a little bit now as well. And of course, as we've already mentioned with James Copley from the Sunderland Echo reporting that Lewis Hamia could be set to head to Italian club Juventus on loan. Someone who at Sunderland has not really had much of a chance. You could argue that he always looked a little bit too lightweight for the Championship. Didn't really seem as though he suited it too much. But I'm not sure. We'll see, won't we, in terms of how if that one does go. I mean, whether he plays much at Juventus or goes into a youth setup, that remains to be seen. Obviously, we're still looking at the Chris Mepham deal from Bournemouth on loan to Sunderland as well. Anything else happening that I can see? Not at the moment. Of course, Newcastle on Sunday, they play Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham confirming today that Dominic Solanke will miss that game. Still injured as well. Richarlison looking doubtful for that game too. So that's two big blows for Tottenham going into that game. Sunderland are away to Portsmouth. Now, obviously, I was at Regis Labrisa's press conference yesterday where he spoke about the linked phases that he's been trying to coach into the side in terms of losing the ball. I know we've already mentioned this a little bit so far. Nick Barnes, of course, they're always asking about strikers. And Fabrizio Romano reporting that they've submitted a bid for a striker from Ghent as well. Middlesbrough, that I can see anything happening at the moment. So at the moment, it's perhaps picking up a little bit compared to where it was when this stream started. Of course, Newcastle won't be losing, or it doesn't seem to be that they'll lose any of their big players from last season, and of course they still remain the big players. I'm talking about Anthony Gordon here. Despite interest from Arsenal, from Liverpool, Bruno Guimaraes will be staying, Alexander Isak will be staying, and of course that's a positive for Newcastle. I mean, as poor as the window has been in terms of incomings, keeping a hold of them has been a positive, and that's probably the only positive that Newcastle will have from this transfer window. Of course, you've had Lewis Hall come in as well, given that his loan was made permanent. So yeah, so far it's looking like a not necessarily that busy of a window, deadline day, but there could be something happening later on in the day. I mean, certainly we'll get Mepham to Sunderland. Sunderland might look to bring in a striker as well. We'll see whether Newcastle are able to bring anything in the end. As I say, we'll be at the training ground later, see whether any incomings arrive up in Little Benton. We'll go live again then. But yeah, at the moment there's not a lot happening. I think is the main point of view. So what we're going to do is, whilst we've hit the 45-minute mark, we're going to take a little pause for now, but the stream will stay live, and if anything else comes up, we will be back straight away. But for now, we're just going to switch off, and we will be back though.